Let's go ahead and get started. So, my name is Julian Duncan. Thank you all for being here for the Spotlight on Aviation. I represent the Major John Leroy Haynes Florida Veterans History Program. This is the first year that we've had this program here at the Folk Festival. It is a new program. And I want to give you just a moment on it before I introduce our panelists. So the purpose of the Florida Veterans History Program is to collect and preserve the stories and experience of Florida's veterans and the state of Florida's military contributions throughout the nation's history. As we have this celebration this weekend of the cultures, traditions, art forms, and especially the people that make Florida unique, Florida is home to 1.6 million veterans, including the four panelists you see on the stage today. All four of these members have aviation experience. Of course, the theme this year is air, so we're spotlighting the various kinds of aviation throughout the military, in the cockpit, and outside of it, different landing craft, which Michael and Gordon will talk about a little bit, and so forth. I do want to take just a moment before we begin and recognize that this weekend is Memorial Day weekend. So I think taking a moment to just recognize that that is what we are marking this weekend is important, and to remember and keep in their minds the men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for this country. So just a moment to acknowledge that, and with that, let's go ahead and begin. So I'm going to have you guys go, again, my left to right, and just introduce yourselves and briefly tell us what you did during your service and a little bit about your aviation experience.
I'm Harry Graham, live in Tallahassee now. I was an Air Force officer, and did a number of things in the Air Force, but aviation related, I was what's called an airborne intelligence officer. So I flew in an EC-130E communications aircraft. So we worked a lot with our friends in the Army and other airborne assets and ground assets. So I got my experience in the air with the Air Force. We also did a number of joint operations. I got to work with Army pilots and Navy pilots through the years, and it was a great experience.
Great.
I'm Boogie Knight. I was went into service right out of high school, and went to flight school, and then I went to Vietnam. I went to Cobra school after flight school, and then I went to Vietnam as a Cobra pilot. And when I came back from Vietnam, I was a Cobra instructor pilot in Hunter Army Airfield, Savannah, Georgia. And it was a pretty grueling time in Vietnam.
I'm Michael Roehr. I was in graduate school at University of Miami in oceanography. Had to work one semester, and the draft board found out about that. I had to take some option in the military and got through officer training school, went on to pilot training, and then went through a number of fighter aircraft through the years, the F-4, the F-101, the F-105, and a few other training aircraft. And even though I went in under what seemed like some pressure to start with, it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity.
I'm Gordon Hunter. As a boy growing up, I always liked to be on the water around boats and sailing and so forth. So the Navy was a natural thing that I wanted to do. And so I applied for the Naval Academy, got as far as a third alternate congressional appointment. So I took my second chance, and that was a Navy ROTC scholarship. So I went to college, had Navy classes, graduated, went to Pensacola flight training after I finished school. And the Vietnam War was just kind of getting hot at that point in '66. And so they needed me badly, so I was called a replacement pilot to replace somebody who was missing in action over Vietnam. So they pushed me through really quickly. I checked out, I went to bases, Pensacola, Florida, started in Meridian, Mississippi, and then Beeville, Texas, and then Lemoore, California. And then I flew from Travis Air Force Base over to Clark in the Philippines, and they airlifted me right out to the ship. And as soon as I got aboard, they put me on my first flight. And it was a really interesting career, and I'm sure Julian's going to ask me some more questions about some of the experiences we had. But after my Navy career, I flew 30 years for Delta Airlines, and so I still kept my feet in the cockpit in some way or another. Thank you.
So, question for everyone. We can go in any order we want. What attracted you to aviation? Did you know you wanted to fly, or did you? How did you find your way into aviation?
You talk to
Talking to
I can start. Sorry. When I asked to get into officer training school rather than be drafted and end up in the Army, they said, "Oh, sorry, we can't accept you unless you want to be a pilot or a navigator." And I said, "Wonder what a pilot and a navigator do." And I said, "But I'll do it." And I want to point out I'm not one of those persons that grew up wanting to be a pilot like so many are, and I have great respect for them because they made it all come true. I went into it cold, and as soon as I was there, I knew I loved it too, and it worked out beautifully.
My story? Okay, I was really set to become a naval officer aboard a ship, and in my Navy ROTC experience, the first summer we went aboard a ship, a destroyer off the coast of California, and we had an experience I told yesterday, but we were refueling off from an aircraft carrier. So we were bouncing along, getting wet. The hoses were across, the water was coming across. We were cold and wet. And I looked up at the aircraft carrier, and up in the flight deck were these two guys in flight suits with their arms in their wet, looking down at us. And I said, "That's where I want to be." So when I got back to school, I asked to be put into the flight training program, and that was it. I was like Mike. I really had not been a born pilot, but it was something I adapted to later as my career went on.
when I was in high school, I was like 16 years old. I wanted a motorcycle. So I told this story yesterday, but I wanted a motorcycle. So I went to my dad and I said, I'd like to get a motorcycle. And he said, well, you go to work, make your money, and get you a motorcycle. I said, well, I worked on a farm. I had the money and I found a motorcycle. It was a Harley Davidson. He said, you're not getting a motorcycle. I just saw a guy get killed on one. So this friend of mine said there's a guy at the drag strip that will teach you to fly. So I went over and talked to him. And they bought two J3 Cubs and a J4 Cub for $375 a piece. And they were used to, in a government auction that were used to haul moonshine. I was from the moonshine country. And so I started flying. And then when I graduated from high school, I decided I was going to be drafted. So I went to the Air Force and I went to the Marines and I went to all of them. And they said, where'd you go to college? I said, well, I just got out of high school. And they said, no, you can't. So I walked by an Army recruiter and they had a picture of a helicopter on the door. So I went in there and this guy, the sergeant in there, and he stuttered. And I said, I just graduated from high school. Can I fly in this man's Army? And he said, come here, boy, sit down. So that's where I went. I went in the Army and started flying.
I don't have quite as an exciting stories as either of my colleagues, any of my colleagues here, but my depth perception wasn't up to snuff, so I couldn't be a pilot. I didn't want to be a navigator. I'm not a second seat kind of guy, but I wanted to have fun in the military, so I was able to become what's called a officer aircrew member. So I was an airborne intelligence officer. Got to do some cool stuff again with the Army and the Navy and the Marines and other foreign air forces, and eventually was able to do some really cool stuff without getting into too much detail. They're called national missions. It's a lot of fun. I think these gentlemen know what I'm talking about. But so I got to do that, even though I was not a pilot. It allowed me to get into the operational Air Force. And that led into the special operations world, where having that background really helped. So I kind of backed into it, but thoroughly enjoyed it.